Okay, Rousey's impact on the sport cannot be denied or underestimated. And that brings us to the top 5 of the day, the top 5 most influential fighters in the UFC. Sharp.
Now, this is my top 5 personally. A lot of you won't agree with this. Number 5, Shogun. He was 19 when he came into Pride and was just doing work. And for me, he was a guy who I emulated. I really wanted to be like. He got me involved in the sport, so he's my number 5. I start with him. At number 4, Rampage Jackson. He was howling his way into the cage, Pride, UFC, so marketable. He's a guy who just kind of took the sport by storm. And he marketed himself better than most guys that I can remember. At number 3, being a big jiu-jitsu guy, Nogueira. I fought him myself. He's kind of the king of Brazil. Nogueira's a guy who would win through jiu-jitsu. He's one of the first to do it, and especially as a heavyweight. We don't see a lot of heavyweights with that kind of jiu-jitsu. At number 2, he has to be in your top 3. If he's not, you guys need to lose my number, is Fedor. Fedor is he's the first actual beast of Pride. He was such a monster. He was so much fun to watch. And number 1 is TITO Ortiz, because he was the bad boy. He was the guy who got the whole marketing. He was the guy who talked the trash. He was kind of the first Conor McGregor who actually was winning and getting away with talking trash. That's why he's my number 1, Mike.
And you know Dana White loves you for picking him as number 1. Brian, what have you got for us, buddy?
I have no idea where Brendan is coming from. I agree with the Tito Ortiz, but everything else is, I don't even know what he's saying. All right, so number 5, obviously Anderson Silva. You are going to have a whole generation of people that not only are watching Anderson Silva, they're going to try to emulate Anderson Silva. He was like water. He was just so incredibly fluid. He fought like nobody else. And for that reason alone, everybody who's coming up is going to be trying to emulate Anderson Silva, including John Jones, by the way.
Hopefully not the same supplements.
Sir, please.
Ooh.
Number 4, I would agree with Brendan, Tito Ortiz, and I'll just let, Brendan said it best. I think at the end of the day, he was the Huntington Beach bad boy. He gave this sort of like he was you didn't like him, but you loved him anyway. He was, a 205-pound champ and backed up all the talk.
Of course, he's now the people's champ.
Yes, yeah, exactly. You got to go with Chuck Liddell. Chuck Liddell was a wolf. Chuck Liddell had that incredible mohawk. Chuck Liddell was jumping in the fire. I'm quoting Joe Rogan and said, basically, let's see who burns first. That guy was a wild man, and he was reckless, but he had the technique behind it, and he was just so much fun to watch, man. I mean, Chuck Liddell put the sport in many ways, brought the sport up. Now, without question, and I was going to put her number 1, but I'm going to say number 2, Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey is a woman who not only was every man who was a fight fan tuned in to watch this woman fight, and there is going to be a whole generation of young women watching Ronda Rousey and saying, I want to do that as well. She's so incredibly dominant. She's beautiful. She's charismatic, and she comes to fight. There's no smiley face. Girls, a lot of pressure on girls to be sweet and everything else. Ronda Rousey, it's personal for her. She comes in there to crush you. And finally, without question, Mr. Royce Gracie.
Of course.
Come on now. Royce Gracie, the Gracie family. There would be no UFC without Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. They started it all. Their poster boy, the guy who actually got out there and put his family name on the line was Royce Gracie.
I think your list is the top 5 most obvious.
To be honest, Brian, I think your top 5 was the top 5 of longest answers in the world.
Ever.
All right, yeah. Okay, so I went down a different route. It was top 5 influential styles. Now, number 5, Mark Coleman. He was the godfather of ground and pound, and he inspired an entire generation of wrestlers to take people down and lie on them, which I'm not a fan of, but certainly he was an inspirational guy for that. Number 4, George St-Pierre. He was the true original athlete. Of course, a very wrestling-heavy base game as well, but the true athlete, the consummate professional. How could George St-Pierre not be in there? Number 3 was good old Chuck Liddell with the mohawk. He used his wrestling in a very different way. He used his wrestling to stay on the feet and use his knockout power. He was responsible for the blowing up of the UFC in the modern era. I don't see how any list could not have Chuck Liddell in there. And number 2, of course, the man of the moment, one of the greatest of all time, is Anderson Silva. Listen, the guy's unbeatable. He seemed unbeatable for a very, very long time. Does things that just defy logic. He seems to defy gravity. The guy, he's a legend, and has some problems right now, but we'll see what happens with those. And of course, at number 1, as Brian said before, Royce Gracie. The UFC wouldn't be here today. Well, I don't know about that, but Royce Gracie played a big part in it. He inspired everybody to start learning jiu-jitsu, and Royce Gracie was the first man. They put it on the map, and there you go. There's my top 5.
I like that top 5. I like it.
Oh, thank you very much.
I left off Royce and Chuck. I'm embarrassed.
Yeah, there you go. All right, well, listen, last but not least, we have our rapid fire segment coming up. And keep on sending in your questions to @UFC_now and use the hashtag UFC Now. And we'll do our best to answer them. We will be right back.